We're also going to go Facebook Live once we're ready, which is really cool because then people get to join us from all around the world.
Yossi, I haven't seen you in so long.
Yeah, you should come to the Retreat.
Just be careful. No more hugging. No more
I have to come to Retreat.
We're not, everyone here
we're
is,
broadcasting, right?
Yes, we're live now. So
we're having a very nice conversation in front of everybody.
But I can see on my end that we are starting to have attendees join us. And so I just want to wait a few minutes or so that we can have people start logging on to join this morning. Thank you to all of us who are here for this webinar. We're so excited to have our friends from Jerusalem join us, and Charlene will be giving introductions to everybody. Okay, so at this point, I think attendees will sort of continue to log on and pour in, but I want to turn it over to Charlene. And just one housekeeping item, if anyone has questions throughout, you can submit them in the chat. They will go. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the session this morning.
Thanks, Jenny. And I think most people know Jenny, but Jenny is the director of the Hive at Leichtag Commons and quickly pivoted programming of all kinds that the Hive offers to virtual. We were just discussing the pros and cons of virtual and in person, and Jenny's been a great leader for that. So really excited to welcome our participants in today's Leadership Counts conversation, and really actually excited to see the three faces on my screen because it's just people that I adore and admire in their own way and who are thousands of miles away, but who really I miss seeing in person, but I really have given me inspiration a lot over time. And so I was thinking about, on Monday, like, how do I contextualize this at a time of such great heartbreak and pain and rage and heartbreak, in our nation, in the United States? Why are we turning to Jerusalem thousands of miles away when we see what's happening, to our people here in this country? And it's a good question. It's an ongoing question. It's something that we really ask ourselves on an ongoing basis. But a couple things that I want to share about why Leichtag in general looks to Jerusalem and supports Jerusalem that seem all the more applicable in this time is, number one, I wrote an article about this once. When you look over thousands of years at the city of Jerusalem, this iconic city, this ancient, this muse, this city with such relevance and meaning, and in the old maps, Jerusalem was literally at the center of the world. Literally, you see it at the center of the globe. But when you look over generations and you look at how change happens in Jerusalem, really, it always happens from the bottom. It never really happens from the top, whether it be looking at the rebuilding of the Second Temple, whether it be in the times of Jesus, whether it be, there's an instance again where change only happens and only lasts in Jerusalem when it comes from the ground up. And definitely that's going to be a subject that we're going to be talking about today. Each of our leaders are leaders who have really come from the grassroots, from the street, from the real core of what it means to make change. And I think that our country, America, has a lot to learn from that, from really listening to those who are marginalized and fighting from the bottom up. And so, so that's one thought that I had as we work in this country to really dismantle the systems that that oppress those who they were very meant to protect. And another reason is that because of the maybe the grassroots nature of change in Jerusalem, one of the things that we found in our experience, at least, how we why we chose Jerusalem more, what we do in Jerusalem, is we look at functional pragmatic coalitions. So we have three people here. It seems so, it just seems so kind of cliche to say that we have, we have somebody from the Palestinian community who lives in East Jerusalem. We have somebody who is secular now, grew up ultra-Orthodox, somebody who is ultra-Orthodox. So we have this seemingly diverse group who have, and we'll hear more from them, who have, though, a strong pragmatic interest, all of them, in a stronger, more resilient Jerusalem. And so maybe, and I will now broaden, not to these three people only, but the people that we're working with, the civil society leaders in Jerusalem, maybe they can agree on like 80% of the issues. They have this core identity, though, that prompts them, this desire for a better way of life, to base their joint ventures on these functional pragmatic coalitions. And it just seems to me, as we're watching this play out, these very important societal frustrations and dysfunction play out on our streets, that we have a lot also to learn about how you meaningfully honor people's individual identities, but also enter into functional pragmatic coalitions with what you can build together. And so we're going to hear about that as well today. And finally, one of the key reasons that Leichtag supports Jerusalem is because Jerusalem is one of the most diverse cities in the world. It is, there's no clear majority in Jerusalem. There's, and it's a city that, it's really complex. And when you talk to, sometimes other funders about Jerusalem, and Israelis too, they talk a lot about problems. Well, we have this problem, we have that problem, we have this problem, we have that problem. And diversity creates problems. I mean, I'm much happier in my Facebook bubble where everybody thinks exactly the same as I do. It's a lot calmer then. It's when you kind of get out of that. And in Jerusalem, you're forced in many ways. You can't really be in a bubble because it is such a diverse city that meaningful change can happen, which is hard and gritty and awful, and doesn't happen that much on social media. It's really on the streets. And so that's another way that I do think our conversation today, I hope, will be really relevant to what we're seeing in the United States. So that's a little bit about why Leichtag Foundation supports Jerusalem. We have supported, we made the decision to support Jerusalem back in 2010, 2011, when we were just getting organized as an independent foundation. We knew that our founders, Lee and Tony Leichtag, really believed in the imperative of Israel. In a very traditional sense. They lived through the Holocaust, they lived through wars, and they lived through a lot of anti-Semitism, and they understood the importance of Jews having a refuge in the world. And beyond that, we didn't have a lot of direction from them in terms of how to support Israel. So as our board investigated many opportunities, we decided to focus on Jerusalem because of all the ideas I just told you about, because the Leichtags themselves were entrepreneurs, because they believed in the power of entrepreneurs to see new solutions to seemingly intractable problems that everybody just shakes their head about, and because we saw talent on the ground in Jerusalem that was able to really see beyond and was very intentional about living in the city. One thing about Jerusalem is generally you're not there by happenstance, because you're not doing the obvious by whether it's, you're not doing the obvious move to whether it's Tel Aviv, Ramallah, Europe, whatever. You're choosing to make your life in a city that's very complicated. And that we think leads to some incredible creativity and some things that the world has to learn. So with that, I really want to get to our discussion, and I'm happy to talk more about what we've learned, how we've learned, why we're inspired. But really, I want to introduce our guests, because we have just great guests here, Rana, Yossi, and Pnina. So I'll give brief descriptions of each of them, and then I'm going to ask each of them, starting with Rana, to shortly describe him or herself, talk a little bit about your personal journey, and then just give some brief background about what you do now. So Rana Fahoum, Rana and I think met a couple years ago. Rana is a remarkable leader, a woman leader who inspires, as a leader for women and a role model. And she's also the CEO of the Jerusalem International YMCA. Yossi Klar. Yossi is also, it's hard to like not sound cliche because there's such talent on the screen. Yossi is a magnificent and creative change maker with a very unique approach, with an approach that is not obvious. Another thing that we like about Jerusalem is it's usually like not obvious. Usually what you read in the headlines about Jerusalem is not the real story. And Yossi's story on the surface of leaving the ultra-Orthodox community, becoming secular, then directing an organization for formerly ultra-Orthodox people is not an obvious one. It isn't the black and white, no pun intended, that you might think. So you'll hear more about that from Yossi. He is currently the CEO of New Spirit, which is an organization working on the ground to improve the quality of life for diverse communities and for young people in particular in Jerusalem. And Pnina Pfeuffer is a social entrepreneur, a political activist, a leader of change from within her ultra-Orthodox community. All three are just Jerusalemites, the best of what that wonderful city has to offer. And so with that, Rana, starting with you, if you could just share some brief background on your personal narrative and then kind of how you've gotten into the leadership position that you now sit in.
Thank you, Charlene. I would like to start by thanking the Leichtag Foundation and you, Charlene, for hosting us. It's really a pleasure to be with you this evening. Well, it's evening, our time. And everything that you said about us, you know, we just give it back to you. You're an awesome leader yourself and you're an inspiration yourself. So thank you again. So I grew up actually in Nazareth. You just said that we're Jerusalemites. So I originally grew up in Nazareth and I came to Jerusalem at the age of 16. So I've been living most of my life in Jerusalem for the past almost 30 years. I did my first and second degree at the Hebrew University and also then a second degree at Tel Aviv University. I started as an educator and my passion is in education. I principaled a school, I established a school in East Jerusalem, in one of the unprivileged neighborhoods of East Jerusalem. I did that for 14 years and then I became an inspector at the Ministry of Education responsible for elementary schools in East Jerusalem. I've been a feminist, a radical, and all my life, well, maybe since I got aware of what's going on around me by the age of 20, I guess. But I've always been involved in NGOs. My first position as a CEO in an NGO in civil society was at the Jerusalem International YMCA. I used to be a board member there, and then when the last CEO ended his term, they asked me to step down and to see the Jerusalem International YMCA. I just want to say a couple of things about the YMCA. The YMCA in Jerusalem, as Jerusalem itself, since Jerusalem is unique, and as Charlene said, it is the center of the world. I mean, Jerusalem is the center of the world. Maybe that's why it's such a troubled city. But again, it's so special. And the YMCA in Jerusalem in that sense is also special. We're YNs, but however, the mission and vision of the YMCA since the very beginning in Jerusalem was a little bit different than otherwise in the world. Our mission since our establishment in 1933 was for a place to be a safe haven for all its comers. It's a place where we promote tolerance and common living and shared living between the three religions in the city of Jerusalem. And the challenge is to live up to that with all the challenges around us, whether locally in the city of Jerusalem or globally. I have 3 wonderful kids and I live in East Jerusalem. And that's it probably for now.
Thank you, Rana. It's a lot. Yossi?
So I'll join Rana by saying thanks for hosting this, and it's amazing that you're doing this and that you're taking the time to hear what's happening on the other side of the world, as Charlene said. I grew up, I was born in Jerusalem and I grew up in a Haredi, Hasidic family.
Ultra-Orthodox, just if
Ultra-Orthodox,
you know.
yeah. Haredis, ultra-Orthodox. And I grew up in yeshivas, which are the universities of the ultra-Orthodox world. I studied in the yeshiva until the age of 18. When I left and enlisted into the army to a unit that's responsible for enlisting ultra-Orthodox men into the army, working with the ultra-Orthodox community. And there I had the opportunity, even though I was going through a process of leaving the ultra-Orthodox world and becoming secular, I had the opportunity to help the ultra-Orthodox community, hopefully in a way, helping them integrate into Israeli society and being able to be more involved within Israeli society. And following that and finishing my army service, I chose to volunteer and actually be one of the founders of an amazing organization called Our for Change that supports people who left the ultra-Orthodox world in their journey into Israeli society and into the secular world. It's a long journey because when you grow up ultra-Orthodox, there are a lot of things that you are not receiving with education and culture and Israeli culture. And when you try and integrate yourself into Israeli society, then it's a process, and a lot of things have to happen during that process for you to be able to be a functional citizen. And a lot of people do that. We have data talking about 2,000 people doing it in Israel every year. So we started this organization hoping to help. And throughout the years, we've been able to work with the ultra-Orthodox community in a sense by saying that the fact that we left the ultra-Orthodox world does not mean that we're not ultra-Orthodox anymore. So we started to do a lot of things that are their purpose is to bring closer the people who chose to leave and their families and the community that they left behind. And the amazing things happen. We had a first time when we had a panel with parents and children meeting up and a lot of beautiful things that are happening. I have to say the Leichtag Foundation supports with an amazing support, Out for Change and a lot of many other things. Today, I'm the CEO of an organization, as Charlene said, New Spirit Jerusalem, which is a 17-year-old organization. It's one of the first organizations to operate within Jerusalem, trying to make it a more habitable place for all its habitants by developing programs for younger people to be able to integrate into the fabric of the city and remain that way, because Jerusalem had a lot of younger people leaving the city during the second Intifada, which was taking place, and also some corrupt politicians, and the city just lost its glory in the eyes of many young people. And New Spirit works to bring that, show them how beautiful Jerusalem is and help them stay in the city and become a part of it.
Thanks, Yossi. We'll talk about that a little more later. Pnina?
So I'm joining Rana and Yossi in my appreciation of this event, and Charlene, your input, your support is always very much appreciated. I will start from the end. Right now, I am CEO of an organization called the Nu Haredim, which is basically an umbrella organization that supports many activists and organizations within the Haredi community that are making change in the Haredi community, such as sexual abuse in the Haredi community, women's rights in the Haredi community, social justice in the Haredi community for Mizrahim who don't get accepted to schools, and all kinds of things like that.
Just to define, like Mizrahim are people from North Africa with that background generally, and Haredi, to remember, is ultra-Orthodox, just for people who don't know.
Thank you. And there's an inter-community racial problem between Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews, where Ashkenazi schools won't accept Sephardic children, or they'll, you know, they'll accept less children into the school, and that's one of the issues that we deal with. One of the major issues, also one of our flags, is public Haredi education, meaning trying to create a system or advance a system that allows for keeping the Haredi culture and structure, but also an education that will provide, especially boys, with the tools to integrate into Israeli society later on, into the workforce, without leaving the Haredi community. So that's one hat, and the other one is I run the Haredi program for, again, ultra-Orthodox, for Iramim, which is a Jerusalem-based NGO that deals with East Jerusalem, and I think they're probably the biggest and oldest such NGO in the city. And about 3 or 4 years ago already, 4 years ago, we kind of partnered on a pilot to see if we could try to include Haredim in the conversation. And since then, every year we've run at least one course. Last year we ran 2, and hopefully this year as well.
Thanks, Pnina. We'll probably come back to some of that as well, because, you know, the next subject I just want to explore a little bit with our group is identity, which takes shape in all kinds of ways, and certainly surprising ways, even in Jerusalem. And Rana, you're the first Palestinian woman CEO of the Jerusalem YMCA. And it's an organization, as you said, with a long history. And frankly, when you go into the YMCA and you see all the wonderful pictures of past leaders, I mean, there's a lot of men, you know, whether or not, there's just a lot of men, whatever sector they come from. And so we'll talk a little bit later, I think, about your Palestinian identity, but can you share with us what it means to be a woman from that kind of an institution, legacy institution, leading that kind of a legacy institution?
So I'm the 16th CEO at the Jerusalem International Jerusalem International Y, and there were 15 men before me, as you said previously, Charlene. And it's just, you know, it's just 15 CEOs later that the board managed to have a woman there. Now, in a sense, it's lots to be put on one's shoulders, because being the first woman, which is amazing by itself, and you know, I'm very happy for having it, and it's challenging by itself, but it comes with a huge responsibility also, because if I fail, it's probably my own failure. However, some other people might use it to say, you know, the first CEO woman failed, and we don't want that, of course. So it makes me take responsibility, not just only for me, but for all women who might actually come after me and CEO the place. I have to say that, you know, we always joke at the YMCA, since it's called YMCA, and I'm neither a man nor Christian, you know, so, because I'm Muslim. And I'm CEOing the place, but I think that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of diversity, and that's the beauty of having a place that is a microcosmos of the city of Jerusalem. It's not easy, I have to say, because as much as we try to say that sometimes gender does not play a role, but I do believe that when it comes to CEOing a place or administrative skills, there is a gender difference. We do things differently. Women do things differently than men do. And I believe that women has a more holistic approach. We pay attention more maybe to details, and to some of the employees that was a little bit surprising at the beginning, and they couldn't, you know, understand why is that. But I have to say that generally speaking, the employees were very happy with the change, and they welcomed it with, you know, with open arms. And it created a buzz in the city of Jerusalem. We have the first CEO who was a woman who was also Palestinian, which was a positive buzz. but again, it comes with a huge responsibility, and you know, I hope once I finish my term, people would say, "Wow, what an excellent choice! We should have more women in this position." I think the part of the identity that is much more challenging is the Palestinian part. But you said we'll come back to that later. And
we'll share a little bit. I think you can reflect on it a little now.
Well, the Y has always been run by either American men. There was one Palestinian CEO before me, and then another Israeli Jewish CEO, Amos. The JIY is a place that serves the whole community of Jerusalem, east and west. It's located in the west part of the city, and it's considered to be one of the cultural centers of the city of Jerusalem. We have a huge sports center. We have the first preschool, bilingual preschool in the country. We were nominated for the Nobel Prize in 1994, but we lost it for, you know who, 1994, obviously, who got the Nobel Prize. We have youth department. We also have, we run a hotel, we run our business. And as I said earlier, it's situated in the west side of the city, and it serves the whole city. And many, many times, which was even I expected that, but even it managed to surprise me, that whenever I talk about the JIY, people see me only as they immediately switch by talking about East Jerusalem, because I'm a Palestinian, which does not happen to my Israeli colleagues. I remember going to a meeting at the beginning of my term to the municipality, and we sat there, and I was with the head of the department of the cultural department at the Y. And whenever they talked about the city, they talked to the head of the department, and whenever they talked about East Jerusalem, they talked to me, as if, you know, I have only one mandate, and that only mandate concerns East Jerusalem and not the whole city of Jerusalem. As if, as a Palestinian, although I am the CEO and I am the one who makes the decision eventually, it's like I cannot decide for the whole city. I can decide for East Jerusalem, I can decide for the Palestinians, but not the whole city. And this is just an example of the politics that come around us. And it doesn't matter how much we say that we want to serve the whole city. And by the way, in terms of number, we actually serve more parts of the west side than the east side. It's always the case that when people come and see me, they can only see the Palestinian, which I'm very proud and happy of. However, this is what we call the ceiling, the glass ceiling that women face, that minorities face, where you want to break that and you come and say, I'm an expert, I have my own skills, and I can do something which is not only necessarily related to my community, but to all communities, and we face hardships there.
It's so, you know, interesting as we explore identity, certainly with your, you know, with the examples you gave, but in general, I also, like, I find people have a hard time with different identities coexisting. Somehow, I think, again, we're seeing this in this country, like, you're forced to make a choice, right? Like, are you, you know, you've got to, like, choose one identity, and that's not how that works. Like, we're more than just one trick ponies. So thank you, Rana. That was really insightful, and I think universally applicable. Pnina, turning to you, you've also taken a pretty unusual role as a woman coming from a more traditional community. So tell us about, though, how, again, something you may not read in the headlines, right? How ultra-Orthodox women in particular are changing their communities from the inside, seeking more voice in power structures, political power structures, civic power structures. Share a couple examples in that experience.
So 2 years ago, I ran for city council, and I did it not in a Haredi party, not in an ultra-Orthodox party, but rather in what's considered a pluralistic party called Yerushalmim. I was on their board for 2 years before that, involved in all kinds of different initiatives in the city. And I wanted to run for city council. Obviously, that didn't work out. Yerushalmi didn't get in that time. But the fact that I ran, I think it was the first time that a Haredi ultra-Orthodox woman got that far in the race to any political position in the city, and at that time also in the country. Today we have Omer Yankelevich, who's a Haredi woman, and she's a minister. But at that time, there were no Haredi women in that position, and also, like I said, Omer, she's in blue and white, which is not a Haredi party. That's something that that has bothered me from a very young age, because basically I feel that Haredi women don't have a voice. And that's not to say that Haredi women have miserable lives or that we're, downtrodden, but at the same time, I felt this. I remember my father calling me a feminist when I was like 5, and I didn't know what it meant. But I used to get up on a chair and like give these, these speeches.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I remember one Friday night I got sent to my room because I got very angry that only the men made Kiddush, the blessing at the beginning of the Shabbat meal. And I didn't understand why it was their thing and not mine. And I didn't care to do it specifically, but I just had to know that I could if I wanted to. So I think that it's very easy to overlook the marginalization of Haredi women, because when you see a Haredi woman, they look pretty much like me, with a wig on their head, but Western. We have credit cards, we have cars. I don't, but many of us do, and jobs and educations. We're better educated than our male counterparts and than the men in our community on a secular level. And yet, when it comes to any decision-making table, we're not there, whether it's political and whether it's rabbinical. And that's not by mistake, that's by design. And that design, no matter how comfortable we'll be and no matter how cherished we'll be, we will not be equal. We won't have a voice. We won't be able to make any changes for ourselves, for our children, for our families, for our communities. And that's something I feel very, very strongly about. And that's why I ran for city council, even though it's a volunteer position. It's very, it's not like a very grateful position, it's not gratifying in any way, except for the fact that you can make change and you can, and also the statement was important for me. Like, even though I didn't get in, I feel like I chipped a bit off of the glass ceiling for other women who might run after me in the city. Which, I mean, I feel the same way about Palestinians or any other minorities that don't have a voice, which is you keep chipping away, and eventually there's a crack and eventually you get through. That's the way I see it. That's the only way to do it. So I also have like a Beit Midrash, a study group in my home for Talmud, which is something that Haredi women traditionally don't study, again, by design. And I felt that that was also something very, very central to my feminist identity, that if you're part of an ultra-Orthodox society where studying Talmud is the most cherished skill and most important central value, and women are completely shunned from that, then again, you have this disparity, this gap that's way too big to overcome. Because anytime you have a conversation, there's always that man who will say, but you don't know. And the thing is that he's right, because I don't have the access to the text. I don't know Aramaic, which is the language of the Talmud. Now there are translations, but even so, it's a very certain skill. Yossi, I'm sure, can tell you. It's a skill that Haredi boys are taught from a very young age, and they focus on it for many, many, many years. And I'm not going to catch up, but still, the access to the text is a really, really important part of being.
I just want to go. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I wanted to just go back quickly to the political, because I think what's really been interesting in our work in Jerusalem is particularly traditional communities, and particularly Haredi women, like Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community. So one of the measures of a Leichtag funder, like whether or not we will fund a program in the Haredi community, often for going back to work, or is that the people in the program stay ultra-Orthodox. Like that it's not that they're trying, because only from building that center from within the ultra-Orthodox, we feel, the ultra-Orthodox community, the new Haredim, the new ultra-Orthodox group that has been estimated in a recent study to be 20 to 25% of the ultra-Orthodox population in Israel and growing, will we think create change. There's a lot that's compelling in the ultra-Orthodox world. So the goal isn't to seek to dismantle it. With that said, so there was a very interesting initiative a couple of years ago, and I don't know if you want to comment on it or not, where a group of ultra-Orthodox women did want to change the ultra-Orthodox parties in particular, and they kind of said, well, we're not going to vote for your party. I mean, you can probably describe it better, unless we have a seat at that decision-making table within the ultra-Orthodox party. Can you just share?
Yes, so they're actually all very good friends of mine. I wasn't part of the first campaign. I already was part of the second campaign, and obviously I support them thoroughly. We also established a Haredi chapter in the Labor Party, and we had our own candidate, Michal that is a Haredi woman. She's now going to be in the Misrad HaKalkala, finance ministry? No.
Yeah.
Anyways, economics ministry. They made up a lot of ministries now. So she's gonna be a consultant there. But in any event, that was definitely, I definitely feel that that's the end goal. It's just much more difficult practically to make it happen. Like, there was no way that if I wanted to run for city council, there would be room for me on the Haredi list. It was just not happening. So I did it the other way, but that doesn't negate the fact that the end goal is to try to get the Haredi parties on board with the idea of having women representatives. I think, again, chip away at the block, do it any way you can, run wherever you can, as many women as you can. Now that the government's back in session, I can give you like a little preview. We're gonna be having a campaign about the religious councils, and including women and including Haredi women on those councils.
The councils that are making important decisions about Jewish law, right, and how it relates to governance.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much, Pnina. So, Yossi, I said this a little bit before, and you addressed it a little bit too, but it would be great to go back to, you moved away from the ultra-Orthodox community, but you shared with me that you feel that it's not a zero-sum game. In fact, once you told me that, like, when you come into a room and there's a diverse group there, you automatically gravitate to the people in the black hats, and you do have a beard, and the black suits, and because that's sort of how I'll let you describe it, but share with us how that works, because it so relates to identity, as Rana was saying. We make one judgment about your identity by looking at you, and maybe that isn't a fair assessment.
Yeah, so the ultra-Orthodox community does not like you leaving it. It's not a part of a part of your options is growing up is choosing not to be ultra-Orthodox. And when you leave, the ultra-Orthodox community sees you, at least historically, instantaneously as an enemy, because you're now not one of them. Now you're with the bad guys, and now you change sides. And when I left the ultra-Orthodox community, I felt like I was not an enemy, and I did not want not to be a part of that community. It's just that I changed the way of life for me. I'm not a religious person anymore, but I grew up there. All of my friends are at that time were ultra-Orthodox, and they were great friends of mine, and I loved being ultra-Orthodox. The certain aspects of being ultra-Orthodox I still love up until this day. I mean, I love the music. That didn't change. I love the food. I love like hanging out with ultra-Orthodox friends. That's the reason why when I walk into a room and I see a table with ultra-Orthodox people, I feel like that's the most natural place for me, because I changed my clothes. Absolutely. I don't look like I'm ultra-Orthodox anymore. And I guess if you ask someone in the street, they might say that I have a beard, as you said, but I don't look like I'm an ultra-Orthodox person. But it's funny, I just had a memory pop up on Facebook. Like, they have these things where they show you what you wrote this day in the past. So 10 years ago, I felt the urge to share with the world that my yeshiva that I used to study in 10 years ago, Nezer Torah, is shutting down. So I posted a post saying, I think it was in the sense of like, finally, I didn't love, we had this thing where we weren't that sad that the yeshiva closed down, but finally the yeshiva closed down. So for me, it's always been being a part of both worlds and being able to keep what I love and keep what I cherish from that world, and be able to move forward, but without giving up on the things I want to still have. And in general, the way that the community reacted, and as a reaction to that, the secular community in Israel, the secular population also sees you as, if you leave the ultra-Orthodox world, then you're anti-ultra-Orthodox. That's been the sense for many, many years. That's been the no. Everyone would ask you, so how are you with your family? And they expect you to give an answer of like, so they're not talking to me, and we're not in touch, and I've been living. There are terrible stories. I mean, if you have Netflix, go watch Unorthodox, and you'll get a story of how it looks like to leave the ultra-Orthodox world. It's quite, I mean, the part in Berlin is, it's too easy for her there. But
it's
in
also
general,
one person's story, which I think has been critiqued. There's other stories too. Go ahead.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm just saying, you would get a sense. And for me, my experience was, my parents accepted me from the first second I talked to them about this. They've been amazing about this along the way. I've enlisted into the army, which is something my family, I come from a very, very ultra-Orthodox family, which has founded Neturei Karta, which is the group that, it's a Jewish group that fights against Zionism and against the state of Israel. It's a very interesting group, and they have interesting claims. And I enlisted into the army. It's not something that's easy for that family, because it's a very Israeli thing to do, and it's against their instincts. And they accepted me beautifully, and they've been amazing to me. So
it's also something that, like, it's not just your decision. I mean, it's your decision, but it doesn't just impact you, right? Like, it impacts maybe siblings, you know, in their marriage, and there's all kinds of dynamics, which is why it is really amazing, you know, given that it's in such a community-based society.
Absolutely, and they've been great. And I wanted the world to react to me as, I don't want to be anti-Haredi. I don't want to be anti-ultra-Orthodox. I want to be ultra-Orthodox, and I want to be not religious, because I think that being ultra-Orthodox today in Israel, and it's complex, but it's in a few words, being ultra-Orthodox today does not necessarily mean being religious. It's a cultural thing. It's a very large community. It has a lot of different people, and they have different levels of being religious, and they have different ways of being religious. Some pray at this time, others pray at another time. Some put on tefillin, which is a Jewish prayer. I don't know.
Accessory? I don't know.
Accessory? Well, what's the term for tefillin
There's
in English?
like a weird, like, phylacteries or something, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So that, I hope you'll forgive me that I don't have the precise description for tefillin.
I don't either. Having never done it as a woman.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So some even, it's one of the most important things for Jewish men to do if you're religious. And some people put on one type of tefillin, and others put it an entirely different type. So it varies a lot with being religious. But being ultra-Orthodox, being Haredi, it has unifying things. They listen to the same music. They have their same heroes, their rabbis, their culture. And I've been a part of it until a second ago. And it's not like once you take off your yarmulke, you become a different person. You're still the same person, but you're in a different world. And I did not want to lose that part of my identity. And a lot of people before me and a lot of people around me, they feel like they have to give that up. They can't, and it's like, there's a saying that's supposed to be, I think, degrading for people who leave the ultra-Orthodox world, where people say, you could take out the person out of the ultra-Orthodox world, you cannot take ultra-Orthodoxy out of the person. It's being said like, oh, you see, you're still ultra-Orthodox. And I say, absolutely. Why should you take out anything and from anyone? I'm ultra-Orthodox. I speak Yiddish. I love hanging out with my ultra-Orthodox friends. It did not change once I chose a different way of life. And I don't want it to change. And getting people to see that it's possible doing both things is very difficult, because for many, many years, it's been very clear cut. If you're not ultra-Orthodox, then you're against us and you're not a part of us. And I feel like it's not like we've come a long way, but it's not like we don't see any more cases of people being thrown out of their homes when they leave ultra. We do see more and more people, and that's the end product. If like it's okay to be both, then it's okay to be both, and you're still a part of us. And the more people would see it that way, we'll have an easier process for people to be able to live with their choices and to be able to live with their freedoms. And you're not going to have to pay such heavy prices for choosing and choosing where to go in your life and choosing how religious you want to be. So I feel like we still have a long way to go, but we do see some change happen. And Jerusalem is a beautiful example of it, because a lot of ex-ultra-Orthodox people choose to live in Jerusalem and they find home in Jerusalem. They feel like Jerusalem is sort of a bridge. It allows them to be close enough to their old habits and to their old culture and to who they are and who they used to be until a few days ago, and still move on and become something else. And that's something that's very unique in a sense. I think there are a few more places in Israel where you could see large amounts of ex-ultra-Orthodox people living, but in Jerusalem, it's so close. You have people who are neighbors of their relatives in the same neighborhood, and they're now not ultra-Orthodox anymore, and their family still is, and they live together in the same neighborhood. And it's something it becomes possible only in Jerusalem.
That's such a great segue. It's almost like it's just perfect. To talking about like another identity of another aspect of each of your identities, and they all commingle that identity as Jerusalemites. Some of the people listening, and certainly all of you know about the program or the grassroots network that the foundation helped to launch kind of from the ground up a few years ago, called the Jerusalem Model, which is bringing together social activists, civil society leaders from across the sectors in Jerusalem. In fact, I think our director, Ariel Marcos, is one of the attendees via Zoom. So hi, Ariel. She does a great job of leading the network. And the guiding principle is, we may have different backgrounds, we may not agree on everything, but we're all Jerusalemites and we all have a shared stake in the city. And we're gonna have to share this city, whether or not we like it or not, whatever political future is. And so we're gonna do that. We're gonna think about how we pragmatically make streets cleaner, or how we pragmatically build better playgrounds for our children. And so that's at the core, this shared identity as Jerusalemites. So Yossi, you already reflected a little bit. So maybe Pnina, Rana, can you share, neither of you were actually born in Jerusalem. I don't think, Pnina, were you? Sorry, your parents weren't?
My parents made, my mother made a very conscious decision to move to Israel, and she chose Jerusalem.
So talk about how Jerusalem plays into your work.
Jerusalem is the way you described it. It's a city like no other. And when I got married, I spent 4 years in Beit Shemesh, which is like a Jerusalem suburb city. And obviously for, financial reasons, it was much more affordable to buy an apartment, even that back then, not in Jerusalem. And as soon as we could afford it, we came back, and I've never left the city. And I have to say that Jerusalem is also like the capital for New Haredim. It's like the Tel Aviv for Haredim. Any social activism, anything that's happening is happening here at a much higher velocity than anywhere else. Not just for Haredim, but especially. So for me, like the thought of being anywhere else is just like it's not an option. This is so, and with all the difficulties. And for me, it's also about, there was a terrible tragedy here that in the old city. And as soon as Chag came out and I heard what happened.
It was the killing of a special needs young man by police.
And, as soon as Chag went out, because I don't have my phone and I don't.
The holiday.
I opened my phone and I, saw that it happened over Saturday, over Shabbat. And the first thing that went through my head was, okay, I have to go and pay my condolences. And it's totally not my community. I didn't tweet it. I didn't post it. Nothing. I just had to go. So I went, and it's just like this feeling that happened in my city. This is like my responsibility. And I think that's something that's very, very Jerusalem-like. Like, I don't think if you live in Cholon or Or Yehuda or Tirat Carmel or any, Ashdod or whatever, that you have this feeling like it happened in my city and therefore I'm like responsible for it. I think that's a very, very strong feeling that Jerusalemites have, even though we might hate each other more sometimes. And in other cities, we also feel much more connected to the city, to our identity. We have beyond being Israeli, we're Jerusalemites. Like if you ask someone from Jerusalem where they're from, they'll say, I'm from Jerusalem, whether they're Palestinian, whether they're Haredi, whether they're secular. Being from Jerusalem is like, it's an identity that's added on to whatever other geographical identity you have. So for me, it's also the place. Also, for me, it's the first time I'm an oldest daughter, and my daughter is my oldest daughter. So she was born in Jerusalem. She was also born on Yom Yerushalayim, and she's the first child in my family to be born in the same city or even the same country, 2 generations in a row, because Jews in Eastern Europe, where my family's from, moved around. We didn't have a place, we didn't have a foothold, we didn't have a home. So when my daughter was born, I realized that she's a 2nd generation Jerusalemite, and that's because I chose to make my home in the same place where I was born, and I want to pass on that legacy. I want, my family to be from here.
Thanks, Pnina. Rana, just building on what Pnina said, you moved to Jerusalem, but I believe your husband and your children are Jerusalemites, right? So can you share about the Jerusalem identity and how it plays into your life, your activism and leadership?
Well, as a non-Jerusalemite, I have to say that I agree completely with Pnina. Jerusalemites, no matter what religion they belong to, what their nationality is, they have something which is in common. First of all, they're a huge passion to the city. And I see that with my husband and with my kids and with our close circle of friends. And I have to say that the city, in a sense, rubs on you. I mean, I'm from up north, but now, I feel partially Jerusalemite also because it rubs on you. I just want to say a few comments concerning some of the stuff that Yossi and Pnina said. In order for us, although we all love Jerusalem, and of course our love to Jerusalem can be a base for us to build good stuff at the city of Jerusalem, but it also many times complicates things. And with the murder of Iyad al-Halla that Pnina just mentioned, I did post it, Pnina. And today in the morning, I found myself in a conversation with a friend of mine, talking about Iyad al-Halla and talking about my post. And when I wrote my post in Facebook, I had an article there, and I said, I could be next because I'm a suspect too. And I used the word suspect because I didn't want to lose my Jewish audience in Facebook and just say because I'm a Palestinian too, or I don't want to be blunt. And I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about something else. That when I was writing that post on Facebook, what I was thinking is that my son could be next. And I couldn't even bring myself to write that on the Facebook, because to me, it felt so real. And I felt that if, you know, sometimes when we get emotional, we go back to our most primitive places. And I felt, because I felt it was so real, that if I write it down, I might actually jinx it and it might actually happen, just the fact that it goes out to the world. And this is how most Palestinians these days feel. And we have to put this out also in the world, to understand that with our huge love for the city comes also a huge complexity to the city of Jerusalem, which makes our work as people who work in the civil society and who are looking for the common good and for the shared living even more and more challenging by the day. Especially that, and this goes back to the point that also Yossi mentioned, that in a polarized society, you are expected to take sides. Many times we view identity as something which is very simplistic. So if I'm Palestinian, so I can be also partially Israeli. And if I'm Israeli, I can't be a Palestinian. And if I have a pro-Palestinian views, then I'm necessarily what we call here small kitsuni or whatever. And many times people judge you just because who you are, what your name is, and how you look like. And I believe this is something which is also universal and relates also to what's going on now in the States. And this simplistic view of identities and of not to understand that we are made of so many identities, and we raise different flags in different circumstances. So in this conversation, I feel I have to bring the Palestinian voice. And in other conversations, I might feel that I have to bring the feminist voice. And, you know, and this is the way it is. And this is the arena that we're working in. And this is one of the challenges that we also face, I think globally, but especially when we talk about cities like Jerusalem. And if you ask me if I want to bring this back to the why and the kind of work we try to do in order to bridge all these gaps, is that what we're trying to do is to voice those who we cannot hear their voices. To make them more vocal. One of the things, for example, that we're trying to do now is to build a health program for Haredi women and Palestinian women who we believe were most affected by the COVID-19. And this health program has to do with their physical health and also with their mental and psychological health, because it is the case that whenever you have a crisis that hits everybody, it always hits the weakest most. And so we thought of these two populations and we said, we have this beautiful, huge sports center, and how can we bring of the good that we have into the city? So one of the ways is actually to build certain programs that serve the underprivileged population in the city of Jerusalem. And to us and to me, this is the meaning of being a Jerusalemite, is to come and think and to find where the common good is, but not to be colorblind, but to see everybody and every individual with the complex of identities that this individual has, with not being judgmental and trying to come and say, so as you said, Charlene, and I agree with you, regardless what the political situation and solution would be, I think it's clear for everybody now that this is a city that needs to be shared. Also nationally and also religiously speaking and also culturally speaking. And we try to translate what we believe and what I believe being a Jerusalemite into action. If we all share this passion for the city, as Pnina said, okay, so let's take it to places where we can benefit and we can have solidarity with each other, collaboration with each other, and even if Pnina is not around the table, okay, and she should be around the table, but even if she isn't, it's my duty to come and say, hey, people, Pnina is not here. You can't hear her voice, and she should be here. And that's the kind of work we try to do at the Y.
Wow, there's so much there, Rana, that is just so universally, I mean, it's so applicable to the country, to the United States now. I feel very connected to Jerusalem. I'm very much in love with, so I feel like I'm like a secret Jerusalemite that you wouldn't guess, like kind of like Yossi, you wouldn't guess he has an ultra-Orthodox identity. I mean, that's for another day, but really it shows, you know, the value. Thank you. Those were brave and important comments and really well taken. I just want to also share that I think, to your point, Rana, that unusual collaborations, or I don't want to use the word collaboration because that has all kinds of overtones, but unusual relationships can take shape, you know, and they're complicated to pull off. Like, so actually we found in our grant making and through the Jerusalem model that actually like ultra-Orthodox women and traditional Muslim Palestinian women, you know, have more in common than you might think looking at their outfits. You know, if they're navigating their own power in a world dominated by men. They're maybe raising large families. There's a lot that they're navigating. And so there's been some really interesting initiatives that have put together those groups in pragmatic ways, in ways that aren't just like, you know, let's sing kumbaya, but ways that think about, well, how can we provide better for our families, or how can we work together on this park that we're sharing and this playground that we're sharing with positive consequences. It doesn't, not to whitewash, because it doesn't, it's complicated, but one step and little steps. And we have to see somebody that I really admire is Micha Goodman, who he's an author, a thinker, a scholar, and he talks about how peace is just impossible, he feels, in this current generation. It's just done, like it's just not going to happen. There's too much. And so what we all need to be doing as change leaders is creating the conditions for peace, creating the conditions that will let the next generation or the generation after that their first meeting isn't between that police officer who murdered Iyad in the old city, that isn't like the first time that they're encountering each other, or whatever it is, that there's better conditions so that peace can actually happen from a very pragmatic sense. So shifting focus a little bit, you know, and although it's very relevant, Jerusalem civil society across the board really stepped up during this pandemic. As I understood it, at least the municipal voice was often absent from conversation. The top, you know, this grassroots leadership, it really stepped up. And so we experienced this through the Jerusalem model, which maybe I'll talk about in a couple minutes. But first, like, I would love you to reflect on the last couple months. Israel is going back, reopening its economy, navigating the health, consequences of maybe doing that, navigating a lot of economic uncertainty and loss in that economy. But Yossi, maybe we'll start with you, and then Rana and Pnina can add about how Jerusalem stepped up uniquely, and even how Jerusalem civil society stepped up uniquely compared to other cities in the country, not that we're ever competitive.
So I think the very, very interesting thing that happened in Jerusalem was that when talking about Jerusalem and both of its sides, and talking about the Jewish side and the Palestinian side, and talking about the municipality as an official government body trying to operate in an area that it's sometimes not welcome there, but it's evident that the politicians and the clerks do not want to go there. They do not want to help, and they have their reasons for not wanting to be active there. And I feel like what happened was that we all saw and had this understanding that we're in this together. No matter what we think, no matter what's our religion or identity, we're in this together, because I'm sitting now at home, and my view from my window is the Palestinian neighborhood and we're here, and we're both neighbors, And if we're not going to work together into making sure that we are all staying safe, and which was a top priority for everyone in Jerusalem, we're not going to get through this. And what the beautiful thing that happened was that for the first time, you had, and maybe only because you had such a strong civil society in Jerusalem, showing the way for the municipality and for large governmental bodies who did not know what to do in East Jerusalem. They did not understand exactly how they could operate. They had the opportunity to look at the civil society and work together with them to operate not only in Eastern Jerusalem, but also all over the city. I mean, there's a beautiful organization called Sachi, which is it's a youth organization that takes youth at risk and brings it in, but not for activities within themselves, but they do good. They volunteer, they renovate homes, they bring food to hungry people, they do beautiful things. And they were the official arm for the municipality to give out food for people in need, for older people who are in quarantine. They had, they gave out thousands and thousands of crates of aid and help. And they operated, it's an Israeli organization, and they work with youth at risk. And a lot of times you see youth at risk being more racist or more anti the Arab community in Jerusalem. I mean, they don't see things always as we would want them to see. And I had the privilege of that organization, Sachi. They were helping the Jerusalem market. So they packed boxes from things they purchased in the market, and they packed them in a center that is run by New Spirit, the organization that I manage. And they brought the youth to pack the boxes in our center. It's called Allianz House in Jerusalem. It has, in the day-to-day, it has artists and young activists and professionals in Jerusalem operate from. It's a beautiful historical building, and they were packing those boxes in Beit Allianz, and I got the opportunity to talk to one of the girls. And she told me, and it was very sincere, she said, you know, I used to hate Arabs when I was younger. And I used to hate Arabs up until not long ago. And then I got the mission from the organization to go and give out and spread out boxes in Eastern Jerusalem, in Eastern Jerusalem neighborhoods, which are places that she's never visited. And she walked in, and she told me, I walked in, and the first door, I saw a little girl with her eyes so thankful for us bringing in help. And I told myself, I don't care about anything. I don't hate her. She's just a kid dealing with a terrible pandemic, and I want to help her. I see her as an equal. And she said that it was the first time that she had like these thoughts of how we are all in this together. And this, I would connect it to what Rana said, which is that we all understand that we have to live together and we all have to work together. And I think that civil society enabled us to do it, because I'm sure that the official, the municipality or the government would not have been so effective at going in and doing it with a lot of, it's very delicate, and it had to be dealt very delicately, and civil society was doing it. The leadership from civil.
I just want to share also from our perspective as a funder who's worked in the city for 10 years, you know, really starting, civil society developed really organically, and it's in Jerusalem, and our key mission right now is to ensure the resilience of civil society in Jerusalem, because that resilience gets tested every day. It gets tested by a police, you know, killing. It gets tested by somebody, to remain nameless, declaring an embassy. It gets tested by, you know, external forces like all the time, you know, because it's such a, and so how is civil society resilient among a lot of different changes? And for us, at least, this was a real test of the resilience of civil society. We funded, we did fund the Sachi initiative, but that was one of at least 50 or 60 rapid response grants that we made, where we actually took a little bit of a different approach and built on the cultural competence of our network. So the activists that we already knew living in Silwan knew what seniors on his street or the street like across needed food and kind of had some skills, and he stepped up. I mean, that was one example to make it happen if he had the resources. The woman in Mea Shearim might know about youth that it's very hard to quarantine because of the packed, Mea Shearim is a very ultra-Orthodox neighborhood because of the packed nature of those apartments. And so she was able to immediately organize something. And so what was quite remarkable and unique, from our perspective, and really, there's a lot of work to do. There's so much work to do. And I don't want to, again, sanitize it because there's a lot of work to do and a lot of ways that we've stepped back and not forward. That gave us some hope, because only through really trusting those who understand the realities of their own communities and feel equipped in order to actually make change and supported, will we actually get anywhere. Even to your point, Yossi, of the understanding the common good, first you have to be, from my perspective, you first have to be equipped to make the change within your own community, and then you can go on to common good. We could probably debate that, but that seems to be a crucial ingredient for the people that we work with. This was not the only test they're going to face, and not the ultimate test, but a test that civil society really did across the board, by the way, come through in Jerusalem in ways that perhaps other cities couldn't. Like one, I don't want to call it a competitive advantage, but one interesting ingredient was Jerusalem is the poorest large city in Israel. And so maybe young people in Tel Aviv who are activists, they were able to maybe go other places that are more rural and are less intense living wise. And Jerusalemites are kind of like, some of them, I don't want to, but there's some of them are just stuck there. Like there isn't that privilege. And so the ability to make change becomes all the more critical because it's about making change for their grandparents or their grandparents' neighbors, which really came through in Jerusalem. So that was kind of like thousands of miles away, our perspective. So I want to we only have a few minutes left. And so I know that if anybody does have any questions, I know that we got a couple questions, but if anybody does have questions, please send it now and then we'll try to focus on it. So,
Charlene?
Yeah.
I just want to comment on our I want to challenge this a little bit because I agree with everything that you and Yossi said, and I believe that the civil society in Jerusalem did pass the test. And as hard as this test of COVID-19 is or was, I hope it was and not is, but it's an easy test. In the sense that it's always the case that it is much easier for us to come around when it comes to charity or humanitarian aid, or in cases of crisis where we all feel in the same boat, that for us to come and stick together. I want to shift a little bit from Jerusalem and talk a little bit about the civil society and the Palestinian society generally within Israel, where the civil society came together, and it was an amazing experience for us, because it was literally, in my view, the first time that the civil society comes together and also works and manages to also send food, charity, humanitarian relief, immediate needs to cover them, but not only that. It actually managed also to reach out to the government and to cooperate with the government and to change a few decisions made by the government concerning the Palestinians in Israel. One very obvious example was that the Ministry of Education went out with a certain campaign about Ramadan, which we as Muslims view as very offensive. Now, usually what happens is that we write on Facebook, we're very angry, somebody writes a letter. But what happened with the COVID-19 is that there was something which is very well organized of the civil society, that all of it came together and all of it went as a group to the Ministry of Health, and actually the Ministry of Health changed all the ads, all the campaign that we felt offensive. Now, and this is only an example, if I shift back to Jerusalem, I feel the real challenge is still ahead of us. where we can come together as civil society, not only in the sense of giving immediate aid, as important as it is, and it's very important, because in times of crisis where people need food and etc., you know, it's like saving lives. It's as simple as that. However, it's now it gives us a very good ground to build up the next step, and the next step would be is changing policies, trying to lead into working against institutionalized racism, for instance, and to bring this together. And I think, as horrible as it is, and nobody can say that this COVID-19 is an opportunity, but it did lay down the grounds, and it strengthened the grounds of common work of the different parts of the civil society in Jerusalem to take it a step up. And I really hope that that would happen.
I'm so glad that you said that, for a lot of reasons, and to tie it back to what's, you know, happening in this country, which didn't just start on with the murder that we saw in Minneapolis last week. It is systems and, you know, centuries of oppression, and a system that is set up to perpetuate inequity. And only by looking at those systems, I mean, you have to give the Band-Aid and the, you know, full open heart surgery at the same time. You can't let the patient bleed out in the middle of the surgery, but only by looking at those core systems in all of our homes are we really going to move forward. In fact, I heard something on the radio that was so true that I think applies not only in the United States but there as well, which was that this woman was saying that we're talking about changing the system or improving the system, but it's actually not like the system is failing us, or the system isn't working. She said it's working great. The system is set up to oppress the very people the vulnerable, and the very people that it's, you know, she was talking in an American context where a lot of the protections that our system were meant for white men. So it's like really doing well. And so only by changing those systems and dismantling those systems across the board, and inequities of all kinds, health inequities, inequities of living, inequities for the poor, which certainly apply to the Palestinian population in Jerusalem and in Israel. And I've heard really important arguments made that they apply to the ultra-Orthodox. Some of them apply to the ultra-Orthodox in terms of discrimination against the ultra-Orthodox, inequity. Inequity is across the board, no matter where we live, and working to dismantle it should be the core of civil society. So that was, I didn't want for us to get too distracted by the humanitarian aid that was one test, but is not the ultimate test. But I hope that maybe we could look back in a decade, because it's going to take some time, and say, okay, well, that was a horrible time, and maybe we were able to turn one corner only by chipping away, like you said, Pnina. So we're almost out of time, and I would love to leave on more of like a lighter note, because you're zooming away from thousands of miles, and you're about to go to sleep, and we appreciate especially you as it's nearing, 10 o'clock at night, and so just, I don't know, like as you think about us in San Diego, we're starting our day. What should we know about maybe each of your, families, neighborhoods, foods you like? Is there anything that you see as like on a lighter side that maybe we could think about to connect us more deeply together and to you? Maybe food or music or podcasts, or you can come up with your own, but just to sort of end on that note. Who wants to start?
I'll start.
John. Okay, good.
It's actually an initiative that Leichtag supported. We have this website called Kav 400, and we were going to have all these events, cultural events for Haredim and for other people, and then Corona came and kind of like foiled all our plans. But we managed to move things into the virtual arena, and now it's like people just turn to that website in order to find cultural events that are appropriate for Haredim or New Haredim or whatever. And there's everything. There's music, there's art, There's just a lot of poetry, a lot of self-expression. We just posted like a monologue by a gay Haredi young man who remained anonymous, but like that, I think it's the first time that, you know, a Haredi website has done anything like that. And we got all these responses, not just from Haredi, the Haredi community, from like other cultural centers in Jerusalem that want to have, you know, dialogue and, you know, have events. And now that we're all moving, hopefully for a while, out of this quarantine mode, it was very gratifying to like have this venue to use while everyone was trapped at home.
Is that a site we can share with participants, like with attend that they can go look as well? Is that why you're?
It's in Hebrew, but yeah.
It's in Hebrew, okay.
We actually, yeah.
There are some, it gives me an idea though. There's a couple probably resources we can include in a follow-up email to give more of a glimpse into the ultra-Orthodox community. I don't know, Yossi, not to put you on the spot, but like you're always like the podcast person. I think you even host your own radio show, right? You used to
no.
podcast?
No,
Really?
I used to. Yeah, I used to. My reserve service has to do with a radio station that's operating in times of alert. But
maybe you've just recommended podcast to me. I don't know.
Maybe.
But what do you think
what do I think
about the question? Yeah.
Yes. So what I think I know it's been a terrible time for a lot of people, and it's been so rough. My parents, they went into quarantine. I think it's going to be 3 months ago soon, and it's a lot of time, and they didn't leave the house, and they don't get to see their grandchildren. And they have a bar mitzvah. One of my nephews is becoming of age, he's becoming 13, and usually there's a celebration, and they're not going to be able to take part in that. And it's a rough time. And what I wanted to share with you guys is that my mother never used the internet. She does not really know how to use a computer. She never felt like it was something legitimate to do. And during this crisis, she learned how to do this, and she started using the internet, and she loves YouTube, and she watches a lot of things, and she started recommending videos to me. And it's for an ultra-Orthodox woman of her age to get into this. I think it's a beautiful thing for her to have, and it's something she got only because of this time. And and I'm sure we're all going to be able to find things that have been left with us from this time, which is everyone feels like this is going through over us. I mean, it's a world pandemic that we're going through. We're very good at dealing with this because we have Zoom, and we are able to connect, and we have health systems, and we have healthcare. I mean, here in Israel, at least, we sort of dealt with the virus, and people are going back to life. I mean, it's still here, obviously, but there are good things that are going to stay with us from this time. And my mother has a wonderful thing that's going to stay with her from now on.
That's great. Rana, anything?
A couple of things. First of all, somebody asked whether we are trying to, at the Y, to have programs and to reach out to East Jerusalem. I have to say, definitely, this is one of our focus in our sports center and youth department. We're doing beautifully with East Jerusalem, almost 50-50 from the east and west side. We're struggling a little bit with culture, but we'll find a way also to bring the population of East Jerusalem also to us for cultural events. And another a note I wanna, or maybe to ask you, is that we shouldn't look away. We should look racism and injustice and inequality in the eye and act. And I want to leave you with this. I mean, from me, COVID-19 is a horrible pandemic, but I believe that we have the power to overcome. There is another very dangerous disease that is threatening our democratic values all around the world. And we are at a stage where we cannot look away. We have to look racism in the eye, to look inequality in the eye, and simply act. These are my thoughts for these days, frankly. And, you know, I just feel that I need to share them with the world. And we owe this. I owe this to my children. I owe this to my community. I owe this to Jerusalem. And thank you for tolerating us for 1.5 hours.
No, wow. Thank you all. I mean, it's just been so much to talk about, like so many important issues, and you know, Yossi, Pnina, Rana, you're just such exquisite leaders, and I feel like we could all talk about so many things for so long. So thanks so much for your time, for your leadership, for your talent. It's just an honor to know each of you. I really, really, really hope we will see each other in person soon. You have no idea. Inshallah, yes. And thank you very much. And so with that, I will just turn it over to Jenny for any final comments.
Thank you again for an 1.5 hours of just really insightful and words of wisdom. So I appreciate that. I wanted to just mention we added an extra session, which is going to take place on a different date and time. So it's Tuesday, June 9th at 11:00 a.m. Same Zoom link. You're all invited to come back, where we're going to learn a little bit more about the North County COVID emergency fund that was given to social service agencies and sort of the impact locally here in North County. So we hope you can join us for that. And then
Jenny, sorry, I was going to say one more thing.
Go ahead.
Well, no, you finish your announcements. I kind of forgot my last.
And then our last session is going to be on June 24th, focusing on mega philanthropy. So you'll be getting more information about that, and hope to see you at future sessions of Leadership Counts. So I just
wanted, speaking of philanthropy, I meant to say earlier that the biggest reason that Leichtag invests in Jerusalem is because we believe that philanthropic capital should be take the highest risk, the risk capital of social change. And we saw Jerusalem as, without great risk, you can't get great reward. And so to the point that everybody made, like, there's huge risk in Jerusalem and in making any of the kinds of changes that all of our panelists are talking about, whether it's small or large. But without those risks and without the risk takers on the discussion, then we won't get the reward. So thank you all for joining us and in that risk taking, and you took a risk to be with us, and thank you. Okay, Jenny, I think that's it. So, but good day, everybody. Have a good night.
Next Tuesday, June 9th, 11 a.m.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.